I'm Chad Ezell, and this is Three Chords and the Truth, a podcast that explores the connection between God and good music.
This is going to be hard. This is going to be hard. Like every day you get up and you have all these decisions that you make, and like we can all look back in life and pinpoint some decisions that completely change the trajectory of your life. And
Stuff like what, like who you marry?
Yeah. Who you marry, your job. And during the time that you're making those decisions, it didn't seem like a life-changing decision in the moment. But you look back on it and it's like, yeah, that completely changed the course of my life. So when you get up every day, you have these decisions and you don't know which one is life-changing or not until...
God, you want me to like second guess what I had for breakfast?
Well, but maybe not the small decisions like that, but even the decisions you make with the little things, like you start your day out with prayer. If you start your day out with scripture, typically for me it makes the day better. That's a small decision, but those small decisions could influence one of those life-changing decisions.
Sure. And I think, I guess we live relatively comfortable lives.
Yeah.
Like on a global perspective, I think most of our lives, you and I are sitting here in my office. The heater's on. It's kind of cold outside, and it's a pretty comfortable thing. I'm assuming that people will listen to this podcast at some point, and just the fact that you will have a device that allows you to listen to a podcast is kind of a reflection of it. You live a pretty comfortable life, right?
Yeah.
And so there are decisions that impact our life, and we're going to talk maybe in a few minutes about why we make the decisions or what influences our decision-making process. But I think we probably ought to start with the idea that the world, and I think this is where I started asking you, the world is what it is. Like, it's what we've got in 2024 in February. But I think we could probably agree that all is not as it should be, right?
Definitely not.
You look out there, and I think, I don't know how much news do you keep up with, Dylan?
So I'm a little different, and I'm not saying that this is the right way to handle this, but I kind of avoid the news.
Okay. Well, even that being the case, which probably means you're a little bit happier than you would otherwise be. But you know that, people that you yourself or people that you deal with in life, we have personal problems, we have relational problems. There are problems, just big picture problems in life. You and I go to church together. There are church problems that, we have to deal with sometimes. And I think the word that I've just said over and over again is problems, whether it's personal or relational or social or, whatever it may be, it's problem. Where does that come from? Like, why is the world like that? Why are problems, I guess, such a constant in our lives? How do you think about that?
I would say it's just like we were talking about a minute ago, it's the decisions that we make. And all around the world, there are people that are in power that are making decisions that affect others, even people that are not in power, just on like the family level. There are decisions that parents make that affect children, and depending on which way they go with those decisions is going to cause problems or cause life to flourish and peace and prosperity. And
why don't we make that decision all the time? If there's the decision and one of them is, I'm going to use your words, I think this is what you said, one of them will lead to peace and flourishing, prosperity, something like that.
Yeah.
And the other one would leave us or lead us away from that. Why don't we choose the right thing all the time?
I think because a lot of times the right thing and the right decision to make sometimes sucks in the moment. Usually you have to sacrifice something, sacrifice a want or a desire, and
Why is that hard to do?
we don't want to do that
Why not? This
because
is
it's
where you
fun.
you answer, and I keep asking you a question to make you go deeper. Okay?
Because it's one, it's easier. It's easier to go with the quick fix, instant gratification choice. Um, Usually, the decision that we make that leads to growth and peace. You don't see the you don't see the positive benefits directly after making that decision sometimes.
Okay.
But
Like a delayed gratification kind of
yes,
thing.
yes.
Okay.
But for me, it's just easy to go with the flow, make and stick with the bad habits, stick with the uh, the bad decisions.
Yeah, but even right now, you just label some of those things as bad habits and bad decisions, and so you clearly know that some of those things are bad, right? Why? What makes you want to continue in that? And I'm not
I
saying
did,
you. I'm
yeah.
saying
Well,
us. Like what makes
yeah.
us as humans? Like what is our thought process that leads us to seek those things instead of things that we know are good that lead to flourishing and positive results?
I don't know. Sometimes you just it's almost like desire takes over, and and you just
Man, I'm
this
glad you brought up that word.
yeah this is what you want, and
What
you
desire? I mean,
just
where does that come from?
I don't know. We have this desire for uh, we almost feel like entitled to certain things sometimes. Certain ways of living, certain inevitable rights. How
Where'd we get that idea?
I'm not sure. I don't know. It's like it's ingrained in our society, but I don't know if it comes from like because right now my mind's going to it, like the Constitution and the founding fathers saying that every human is endowed with certain rights by God. But where did they get that idea? Are they getting that from the biblical story or other ideas that they brought over here? But you feel entitled to certain things and you desire those certain things, and some of them may not be good for you, but you just want them, and you.
I'm interested in the thought process, and I don't know that I have a great answer. That's why I just keep pegging you with the questions, so that. But I am interested in why we have that desire. Like, where does that desire come from? Because I think fundamentally humans, we're pretty good at doing what we want to do, right? If I want to do it, then there's a pretty good chance I'm going to find a way to do it, regardless of if it's good or bad for me. I may know that it's bad, but if I want to do it, it's the old, looks good, feels good, sounds good thing. And I'm probably going to go do it, right? Uh, Humans, I think, are not great at bridling our desires and restraining our wants. And so we go do it. But where does the desire come from to do that?
I think so. I think about the beginning story in the Bible, and Adam and Eve, they have this desire to go against the will of God, and I'm not sure if it answers that question uh, well, but it's almost comical that literally 3 pages into the story, this problem comes up.
Yeah,
And
if you're 3 pages in, you're using a very wide, uh, large print Bible because it doesn't
yeah,
take long at all to get there, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's in the narrative of Scripture, it's very quick that people start to follow these. I think we would label those as disordered desires, right?
yeah.
And so, where does that come from? Like, why do they become disordered? That's an Augustine thought, I think, from several hundred years ago, but it goes back to Genesis. Where does the disordering of the desires? Who makes that happen? What makes that happen?
I think the culture that you grow up in, the 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 family that you grow up in, whatever you're taught as a child, as this is wrong, this is right, uh, all feed into what creates your disordered desires. Because you could even, I know as a kid growing up, even being told, "Do not do this. This is wrong," sparks this desire in you to do exactly the opposite of what you're being told
Mm-hmm.
is wrong, and you want to do it. Like there's a part of you that wants to go against the grain, and
What would you call that part of us?
uh, the idiot side. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either. I don't either. I was asking a question I don't really know the answer to.
Yeah, I don't. I think something in the story of humanity, something has happened that, and different authors call it different things, but I like the idea of it's almost like a disease or a sickness. It's not really, it's part of you, but it's not you. It's something that is changing what you should be doing, how you should be, and
Where does that? So a sickness, a virus, has. I mean, it has a host, right?
yeah,
That allows the virus to thrive, and I hear that's kind of what you're describing us as, right?
yeah,
Who implants the virus? We're going to drill down on this until we
yeah.
find we can't drill down anymore.
In Genesis, it's the serpent. I mean, the serpent is the one that interjects that questioning within Eve of, well, maybe I'm missing out on something,
Okay.
and maybe there's something better than what God has already given me. So a desire is created by this creature that is in this story.
Mm.
Now, who that creature is, what that creature is, that's a deep rabbit hole, and I to this day I still struggle with that, of trying to name and like put that chaos creature into a box that I can wrap my mind around.
Chaos is an interesting word. I don't know that I expected that to come up. Why'd you use that word?
In in the garden narrative, I think the author does a really good job of describing God as the one that brings order into the world. All of his actions are placing things in the right spots, naming them, giving them purpose, and everything just flourishes after that. And this is a state of order and flourishing. And it's not until you get into chapter 3 that you have this creature that interjects himself, uh, and everything just kind of unravels. And in my mind, that I automatically think of chaos.
Okay.
It's we're
Yeah, so
taking
God creates a very good creation. He describes, right. He's got a habitation for all the plants and animals and humans and stars in the sky and all that, and then he orderly, I think, places things in that habitation that he's created. So there is a lot of order there. And then there are the two trees, right?
yeah
And the two trees are there, and the tree of life and the tree of knowing good and evil, and don't eat of the tree of knowing good and evil. It's kind of maybe confusing origin story, right? And then, and you mentioned chapter 3, the serpent. I don't think he slivers in because he wasn't cast on his belly until
yeah
later in the chapter, but somehow serpent winds up there, and the serpent says a little bit of truth, right? Right? Whenever he says, or he, or whatever, the serpent says, God said, don't eat of this tree, and Eve says, well, he said, don't even touch it, which is not really true. And then the serpent, I think, if I got the narrative right, the serpent says, well, look, you shall not surely die. God didn't want you to do this because then you'll be like God. Your eyes will be opened. There's some truth in that, right? Their eyes were opened. But couched in that truth was, would you call it a lie? A deception, maybe? It was deceiving, right? It was definitely a deception. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different view of this, but it seems to me from that point forward, the lies that the serpent began to tell in the garden kind of spiral. And before you know it, you've got the first humans who were born in that story on this planet are murdering one another. And then you've got, I mean, where does the story go from there?
Well, then you got Lamech, that
where
Cain builds his city, and you have Lamech that decides that, well, if somebody is going to hurt Cain, then I can't. What's the terminology? He says like a small poem, and it's like, was it sevenfold?
Oh, is this the time where Lamech says, "You thought Cain was bad? I'm 70 times worse."
Yeah, there
than
you
Cain."
go. There you go.
Yeah, and so it gets worse.
Yeah, it just spirals out of control.
And eventually, by the time you get to the Noah narrative, I mean, the whole world is corrupt and violent before God. But it didn't start that way.
Yeah.
People started to act that way, and this kind of gets us back maybe to the original question I started with: is why is the world like this? And the world is like that in Genesis, and I think today because a lot of us believe a lie, or lies, many lies. And it seems to me that the origin of those lies would be the figure of the serpent in Genesis. And I would label that as Satan today. What are your thoughts on that? I know that's like, that's kind of out there in our world to even mention something like that, I guess. But what are your thoughts there?
This earlier when I said that it's hard for me to put this entity in a clean box that I can wrap my mind around. This goes back to that. I know that the New Testament authors they wrap the serpent, the devil, and Satan all in the same category.
Mm-hmm.
And this evil is personified in a sense. And we have this character in the beginning story that seems to start this infection of evil and chaos into the world. But at the same time, it's hard for me to distinguish between the evil that this figure is interjecting into the world and the evil that I interject into the world. Okay. And where that line crosses. Like when am I in the shoes of the serpent? Because there's all sorts of stories within, especially the Old Testament, where you have human figures that are actually portrayed as this serpent, and I think of Cain and Abel. You have Cain, who gets a little irritated after Abel's sacrifice is accepted, and his is not. And God tells him that there's this figure that's called sin. It's not really named, but there's something there.
It's crouching at the door.
That's crouching at the door, and its desire is to rule over you. And I guess for me, it's when is this figure acting on its on its own behalf, or when am I acting for it? Okay. And that line for me is hard to distinguish.
I think in that same story, he says sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is to rule over you, but you
can overrule it.
You should rule over it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The same was true with the original humans.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Here's the options. Your job is to overcome your desire, it seems, maybe, and not decide for yourself what is good and evil and decide for yourself what's right and wrong, but just take what God told you, the one who created all this, and live out that truth, right? And instead, they seem to believe the lie of the serpent and started to create alternative facts that they were going to live by. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's interesting that, so the serpent is described as a beast of the field, and I guess it's chapter 2, where the humans are given the role to rule and subdue over that realm of the earth, including the animals. So they've already been told that they need to rule over this beast of the field.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly they didn't.
No.
They allowed the beast to rule over them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just see a repeat in Cain. We see a repeat in Lamech. We see a repeat.
Do we still see that repeat today?
Oh, absolutely.
What's it look like? This is good.
When we see chaos enter into the world.
What's that look like? We've used that word several times, but let's put a little flesh on it. Flesh, I think, will be an interesting word we come back to at some point. But
when we see the heartache and the death just around us in our lives, I'm sure everybody has something that they can describe as that just within their family story.
When you say heartache and death, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
I mean, are you talking about just like a breakup and a funeral, or what are we talking about here?
Like within a marriage, if you just took a marriage and you see the decisions and the habits that, and I'm going to use myself as an example here. If I look at my decisions and habits that I have that cause heartache and stress to my wife, it leads to a type of death in the relationship. Something separates us because I have these desires that I want to hold on to, and they're not good for the flourishing of that relationship. And that's kind of a micro example. But then if you spread that out into society, where even in a small town like Milan, if you have people that decide that their desires are more important than loving their neighbor as their self, that same death in the relationship and the society kind of breaks down. And you can just expand that out to towns, big cities, states, countries, and then look at the death and decay that happens between countries on a macro level.
Yeah, and so you could drill down even further, I think, than heartbreak and death. I mean, you could label, the things that lead to those.
Yes.
And it may be greed, or it may be envy, or it may be anger or wrath, or it may be lust, or it could be it could be pride. And I mean, it could be just wanting people to have a great view of me. I mean, that's kind of hypocrisy, I guess, or a vainglory in the old word. But those things, you strive for those things and make choices based on those motives and those underlying factors, and it leads to a lot of heartache, right?
It does.
And that's, I think, what you're talking about on a family level. I think you also see it on a society level, culture level. And I think it permeates, right? So it begins maybe with me deciding I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't care what anybody thinks about it. Mm-hmm. And however much heartache or heartbreak or pain and death that brings to my relationships, I'm going to do it, and I don't really care. That becomes, I think, normalized. If it becomes persistent, it becomes normalized in a society or a culture, and I think that's what the Bible writers talk about when they talk about the world. It's a system or a society in which these disordered desires that we keep acting on become ingrained and institutionalized in a society, and they become what's normal and overlooked and very common, and we don't think about it. And I think that leads us to the point like today where Christianity is a minority. At least the underlying aspects of Christianity are a minority view, I think, in our world. When I say our world, I mean the world that I know, like the society, the culture that I live in today. What do you think?
The underlining what now?
The underlying aspects, like you mentioned, love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. If we all did that, it would be great.
Yes.
Or even things that are a bit more controversial, such as, I don't know, Christian teaching on a man and a woman married together forever, something like that. Those become controversial, and but that can become a minority view if we continue to act on our disordered desires, right?
Yes.
And those desires, I think, become disordered because we believe lies of Satan, and we internalize those and we start living those out in our lives. If that's true, what's the answer? Like, what's the remedy to this?
That's a very hard question. The one society's been trying to answer since the beginning.
Well, I think you look and sometimes Christianity is kind of seen as an outcast, like true, real, live like Jesus Christianity can be seen as an outcast, even sometimes maybe among people who profess to follow Christ.
Yeah.
I
think.
Go ahead.
I think what to answer that question though, what do you do to fix this unraveling? Is you have to try to figure out, so what is true, like what is true good. And
okay,
and a lot of times you can't, maybe in our part of the world we're somewhat in the heart of the Bible Belt, even though Christianity as a whole is a minority, but in our part of the world that's not questioned as much. I don't think. If you start talking to somebody about Jesus, anywhere in Milan, like they know who Jesus is. They've heard his teachings. I mean, there's churches on every corner in this area, but to convince yourself or to convince somebody else that Jesus is, and the way that Jesus teaches us to live is the best way, is very difficult. And I think sometimes it's difficult to convince ourselves, because there are some teachings that Jesus has that just don't make sense sometimes.
Turn the other cheek.
Turn the other cheek. Yeah, like that is a formula to get killed by your enemy. In some
Somebody
cases,
sues you for your shirt that you're wearing. You give them you're not wearing a cloak, but you would give them your cloak also, and go the extra mile. And those are not natural teachings, right?
Yeah, they go against, especially your desires, but the disordered desires that we already have like built up, and we push against those. Even as Christians, we still. And if you say you don't, then you're not honest with yourself. But you still push against Jesus' teachings sometimes. We like to pick and choose like what Jesus tells us to do, and usually we'll.
Why do we do that?
Because it's easy. And it makes us feel better. Makes us feel better to know, well, I've got these down. Like these are not problems that I have with my desires, and it's easy for me to walk the narrow way in this aspect of my life. But then we'll kind of put blinder goggles on with other aspects of our lives, even though Jesus said that this is the better way to live in this area. But to convince somebody else or to convince yourself that Jesus is, and his teachings is the truest way to live as a human in this world, and the best way to live as a human in this world, is very difficult. And sometimes the only way, I think, to convince yourself that this is the best way is by actually doing it, by actually trying it. Not just the cognitive, like, okay, but this is what Jesus said, this is what the Bible said about this area of my life. That's good and all, and it sounds great, but until you actually do it, I don't think you're going to find out that, oh wait, this is the best way to live. And this is the best way to push against the unraveling of society, the unraveling of the chaos that's coming into the world.
Is by actually just getting out and living a better way.
And yes, by actually doing
things that are good. And
yeah.
You mentioned truth earlier. How would you define truth? I mean, the famous phrase a couple of years ago was, well, those are just alternative facts, right? Or, we hear people today maybe talk about living out their own truth, or be true to yourself, or Shakespeare's "To thine own self be true," which I think was the fool who said that in Shakespeare's play. So truth I mean, today it can be seen as something that's relative, and it can be seen as something that maybe just doesn't even exist. I mean, if there's no standard, then is there really any truth? But if I were going to ask you, like, to define truth, like, what would you say?
As a Christian, somebody trying to follow Jesus, my mind automatically goes to Jesus. Like, Jesus is truth.
Okay,
Like,
the way, the truth, the life.
yes.
Okay.
And not in your typical salvation sense. Like, this is and salvation can be a loaded word sometimes. Not in the truth that this is what you do to be saved, but the process of salvation is true in living the way that Jesus lived. So as a Christian, my mind goes to Jesus. Now, I guess you would call it secular side, I think of truth as hard facts.
Okay. Like reality.
Reality.
Truth is maybe it's what is real.
Yes.
Right. It's gravity is true.
Yes.
Right. You jump out of an airplane and you figure that out pretty quickly.
Yes. But even in that realm, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what is true, because you think of because I think our science logic, or at least with me, that side of my mind thinks of truth as something that can be measurable and something that can be like quantitative and repeated. But there are some truths within our lives that you just cannot do that to. Like, if somebody does something to you that emotionally hurts you, good luck trying to measure that. Like pain. Pain is probably one of the truest things that every human
we
lives
know what we
with.
mean when we say pain, right?
When we say pain, we know that is true. But you can't measure that. You can't measure, pain. But we know it's there, and we know that it is something that every human experiences.
It's real.
And it's real.
Yeah. So truth, I think maybe we could say that's like reality. It's,
yes.
You said cold hard facts, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we take truth as reality, what's a lie?
The opposite of reality.
Okay. So things that are untrue,
yeah,
or the opposite of reality, whatever doesn't really correspond to what is real, right?
Yeah.
So in the Genesis story we talked about, the lie was, you shall not surely die. The lie, I mean, that became a reality, right? The lie would have been, or part of the lie would have been, you'll be like God. Your eyes will be opened. Which there's a little truth there, but it's also kind of couched in a lie. It's not. There's enough truth to make it believable, but the reality was, you're not going to like this. Like, you're about to run into the consequences of this, and it's not going to be good. It's going to be, your word, painful. And so I think we operate our lives based on our thoughts, and our thoughts or our desires, they're formulated by the information that we receive, whether it's truthful or not, right? So it can be truthful, it can be a lie. And what I think is dangerous about that is sometimes we don't critically think about it. We don't think about what we're doing sometimes, or the information that we're receiving. Here, I think this is a good example. You could throw me for a loop, and it could be a terrible example, but did you drive here from your house today?
I did.
Did you, when you got into your car, did you think about, like, do you remember thinking about, I need to put my seatbelt on?
Absolutely not.
Did you think about whenever you, whenever you pulled up to that four-way stop that you get to first out of your house, did you think about what direction you need to go at that point? And I don't think you did any of that. You can't see this because this is audio, but you're shaking your head.
Yeah.
You're
saying no.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So you didn't do that because you don't have to think about things that you do every day, right? You've driven. We are recording this in my office at church and you've driven here a million times. And so whenever you got up this morning to come this direction, to come to my office, you didn't have to think about putting your seatbelt on because you always do it. You didn't think about putting your blinker on when you turn because it's just what you do. We automatically do these things that become second nature to us. You do it without even thinking. And that's good if our minds, I mean, we do that not just with driving. We do that with how we make a lot of decisions in life. We don't think about it. And that's good if our minds have been molded by what is true and real, cold hard facts, right? But if we have believed a bunch of lies, and that has changed how we think so much that we don't even think about that anymore. And if I'm operating my life on a whole set of lies, that can be a very dangerous thing, right?
Yes.
But we don't think about it a whole lot.
It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, and not that every small decision that you make throughout the day should have you in just a state of constant anxiety, but those small decisions like putting on your seatbelt, making sure that you use your blinker, paying attention to the red light before you cross the intersection, those are small decisions. And during the moment that you're making them, they don't seem like much. But those small decisions can turn into life-changing decisions based off of what happens.
Yeah.
If your seatbelt's not on and then you get in a wreck, and that was the only thing keeping you alive, that small decision turned into a life-changing decision. And that's what I was trying to, I guess, express earlier was I don't know when I'm in that autopilot mode of making decisions, almost.
Autopilot. That's a good
Yeah.
way to describe it, I think.
Yeah. When I'm in that autopilot mode of making decisions, which decision am I making that's going to change the complete trajectory of my life?
Yeah. If you believe truth, or if you have internalized and your mind is shaped by what is true and real, then I think that's going to lead to a well-ordered life. I mean,
Yeah.
Lack of chaos, well-ordered life, freedom to live the kind of life you're supposed to live. If you believe lies, then that leads to a distorted view of life, a distorted view of the world, disordered desires on the inside that a lot of times lead to a life of ruin. You talked about that a few minutes ago. But I think we have to be aware of that. And we can believe all kinds of lies that lead to all kinds of ruin in our lives. And so when you think about the world today, I think one of the early questions I asked you was something like, why is the world like it is? And if you look at the emotional pain and the relational distress and the family problems and the problems with society and even political issues that are going on in our world today, it seems pretty clear to me that we've lived maybe or maybe not we. Sometimes we live by a set of lies that leads to just all kinds of meltdown.
Yeah. It makes me think of the, and this is kind of a simplistic way to live, but it makes sense. That you remember the bracelets that everybody used to have, the WWJD
Of course.
bracelets. I think of these decisions that we make, if they are lies, it's as a Christian, if we believe that Jesus is that truth that we should follow, having that mindset with every decision, well, what would Jesus do in this situation, is almost like a filter.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of filters out our autopilot decision making and helps us see, okay, well, maybe this decision in this way that I'm already programmed to think is a lie.
Yeah.
And Jesus, if there's anything that Jesus does well, is he completely turns your thinking upside down on what you think is right and what you think is wrong, or what's the best way to live in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what he's doing whenever that time when he talks about the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what we see in life. We see a lot of stealing, killing, and destroying families and values and even morality and just all kinds of stuff, right? We see that. But he says, I came that they may have life, and to have an abundant kind of life, overflowing kind of life. That's a good life. That's a well-ordered, lack of chaos kind of life. And it seems in Jesus, speaking, at least, it seems like the reason that the thief is able to steal, kill, and destroy is because we believe some of those lies that are told, which lead to destruction. And so I'm thinking about that time when Jesus talked about there were religious people, and but he said, "You're of your father, the devil." Right? Yeah. He's a father of lies, been a liar from the beginning. And so even Jesus zeroed down on the idea, or the way that Satan works in the world is by deception and lies, and getting people to get on board with that and live their lives based on a lie, which leads to pain and destruction and suffering in our personal lives and our emotional makeup and our family lives, relationships, society as a whole. I mean, it just kind of spirals and balloons up into a lot of suffering, right?
Makes me think of so we're asking all these questions about truth, and I think of Pilate when Jesus is standing before him, and he asks, "Well, what is truth?" And I think it's standing right there in front of him.
Jesus is true.
Yeah.
He is true.
But in Pilate's mind, I think this is the lie that has infected him and his decision making, is that he believed that what was true to him is, I have the power to kill you. And that is the way that I'm going to bring peace and flourishing, is by the use of death. Mm-hmm. I'm going to use death as my truth. Mm-hmm. So what is truth? And I don't think Jesus ever answers him in that.
He doesn't.
In that dialogue, but I think the author writing that story down is not interjecting comedy per se, but it's kind of ironic. Mm-hmm. that this man is asking what is truth, but then truth is standing
in front of him, but he is still going to proceed based on a lie that he's believed.
Yeah,
that's the
as his
Pilate.
Truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is a podcast kind of about Sturgill Simpson.
Yes.
And here we are. I don't know how long we've been doing this. We hadn't talked about Sturgill Simpson one time.
Just a warm up.
That was the sermon introduction.
Yeah.
I asked you to be on this because we were talking, and you're a fan of Sturgill Simpson's music, right?
I am.
And I think when I told you I was going to be doing this, you brought up a song from Sturgill that I think was, did you say it's the first one that you've listened to?
It was I can't remember what Pandora station I was listening to, but this song popped up, and it was funny because...
Was it Florida Georgia Line Radio?
Absolutely not. I think it was either Tyler Childers or like Cody Jinks or something like that.
All right.
So this song, Voices, pops up.
Don't give away the song, even though it's on the title of the podcast. Yeah.
And I heard it, and the first thing that popped into my mind was, I didn't think Waylon Jennings had a son that was doing music. And it because he sounded just like Waylon Jennings to me. But I think that day I created a Pandora station off of that song and listened to his stuff, and it's just good. It's good music.
Good writing. Writing. What do you think, Sturgill? And I'm not. This is obviously, we're not going to be able to zero in on exactly what he thinks about these things. But one of the first things I said in this project was, this is us trying to get inside the mind of the writer of the song. Mm-hmm. Most of these on the front end are going to be Sturgill. We're going to branch out into other artists before too long, but we're trying to get in his mind and think about what he's thinking about as he writes these songs, because there are some deep underlying spiritual tones behind this, right? What do you think he thinks about lies?
Based off of this song, especially, he's not a fan, and I think he's somebody that sees lies in our world that cause a lot of problems. And he's kind of given a poetic, uh, I guess,
Well,
rendition.
yeah, the song begins with him up on a mountain, right?
Yeah,
High top mountain. I'm assuming
yeah.
that's what gets a lot of his writing. And there's a voice that he hears up on that mountain, right? And what does that voice tell him?
Lies. It's telling him what's the actual.
There's a line here: "Ask them no more questions, and they can't sell you no more lies."
Yeah,
Is that the line we're talking
yeah.
about?
Ask him no more questions. I can't tell you no more lies. Yeah, and I don't think that this popped into my mind the first time I heard this song, but after you study the biblical stories, it almost becomes that filter that you see everything else in the world through, even music,
Mm-hmm.
and things start to pop out to you. So when I hear Sturgill talk about being on top of a mountain and then hearing a voice that's trying to sell him lies, I automatically think about Adam and Eve in the garden on top of the mountain. And
Now, he doesn't make that connection, but I think it's a clear connection, right?
Yes. In my mind, it is. I can't help but not see that now.
Even if it's not in the mind of the writer, I think the fact that Jesus says, he's the father of lies. Satan is the father of lies. So any untruth or anything that doesn't correspond to reality, that's kind of a product of what Satan has sold us, right?
Yes.
And in Sturgill's, he doesn't mention the devil or Satan or anything here, I don't think.
He does mention a serpent.
He does.
A forked tongue.
Oh, yeah. Maybe he is there.
Yeah.
Maybe he is there. But he does start off talking about lies. And I do think it's interesting that the connection that he makes in the very next verse is, I hear voices all around me in society's depression.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in, how do these lies that we believe sometimes lead to societal problems such as depression or chaos? Or, I mean, what do you think about that?
I thought, so on that lyric, I wrote down a small note that said the wide path. Now, good luck. Good luck trying to. Yeah. So,
wide,
now,
like
the wide path.
WIDE.
Yeah.
Path? Okay.
Yeah. I think of Jesus talking about you have this narrow path that leads to life and this wide path that leads to death. So when I think of the word societal or societies, I think of a broad, general way. And I think in this lyric, he's talking about these lies that have creeped in to our society's thinking and decision making that is now common knowledge, the common way of doing things, the wide path of decision making. But it's leading, in Jesus' words, is leading to a type of death. And Sturgill's words is leading to society's depression, unraveling of order in the world.
So take me through the process. How does it go from a lie that's been sold, right, to a societal breakdown of depression or something like that? What's the process there?
For me, I think of like the family, and so I grew up in I guess you would call it like a broken home.
Okay.
A couple different divorces, and the normal way of viewing, or maybe the easy way of viewing a marriage nowadays is, if this isn't working out, if it gets tough, it's disposable. You can get a divorce. Mm-hmm. That's the easy way out. And I think that is a societal norm now. But that easy way of decision making just within a marriage leads to all sorts of problems with the kids, with the broader family. Everything becomes, destroyed at that point. It makes things very hard, and I'm sure I don't know the stats on this, but I'm sure there are stats out there that show and how you quantify happiness is difficult. But um, if you look at kids that come out of a broken home versus kids that come out of a home where the father and mother stayed together, I'm sure there are stats that show that the ones coming out of a home that decided to make it work uh, don't have near as many problems with whether it's crime or uh, depression or whatever.
Yeah.
But to me, just little things like that's a breakdown from the what is now the norm is to go the easy route. If things get a little sticky and get a little bit difficult, then let's just get rid of it and we'll quit. But and that could be just one family. But what if you have every family throughout the entire country, the society that decides that this one thing is the easy way out, so let's just do that. That's the lie that we've been told, and just see the breakdown of society and the depression that comes with that and the problems. To me, that's where my mind went, because a family that has been broken up in that way through divorce, and it's just not the same. It's still there. It's still a family.
Does that make it more difficult for you? I mean,
oh yeah,
you've become a family man in your old age.
We're actually doing I guess a couples marriage class on Wednesday night right now. And one of the things, me and my wife actually dated for 7 years before we got married.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah. And looking back now, just living up in a broken home was a lot of the reasoning behind me not wanting to pull the trigger on finally asking her to marry me. Because I was, in a way, terrified that, because I'd seen this happen. This is what it looks like to be married, with my parents. And that clearly was not good.
Yeah.
So it made me gun shy. Like I did not want to end up making the same mistake.
Well, I think that shows probably some foresight on your end to know that there are damaging and destructive possibilities that come with beginning a family. But I also think I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I hear you saying that because you grew up maybe in a setting like that and saw how it's maybe, is it okay to say that that's not how it's supposed to go?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That has made it harder for you now to get on track and stay on track. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of mushrooms up and spirals into something that it was never really intended to be. And it all started maybe with just a bit of untruth and deception and lie. And in Sturgill's words, that leads to a societal depression. And I don't think it's just, obviously it's not just true with marriage and family. I mean, these are things that probably sweep through all of human society, right? Mm-hmm. Can you think of other ideas or other examples of what that may be like?
With Jesus, he kind of turns the tables on who your enemy is. Mm-hmm. And this is another one of those examples that could, on a micro level, could be that person that you work with that you can't stand, that you just don't want to be around, that you would love to see not succeed in life. So that's kind of like the micro level of a lie that we've lived out, is that we have enemies, and there's certain ways that we need to act towards our enemies. And eventually we would like to see our enemies suffer. Mm-hmm. So that's the micro level, the person at your workplace that you don't like, will you expand that out to races that do not that have now tacked on this enemy label onto a certain race,
But
and
you
that
know,
is
there are people who would hear even, I think you say words like that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but if I don't say it, I'll forget it.
yeah.
I think there are people who would hear you say things like, even just the enemy aspect. They would hear you and would probably say, that ain't right. They would hear you and probably disagree with not your interpretation of Jesus, but what Jesus said. They would disagree about loving your enemies.
Oh yeah.
Why?
Just like we were talking about earlier with we can say, okay, I've got these teachings of Jesus down. And I'm going to focus on them. But there's these other teachings that I'm just going to kind of sweep under the rug. I think a lot of times we put, especially the loving your enemies language that Jesus has, we put those under the rug.
And I've heard people say, and you may know the source of this, I don't remember, but I've heard people say or read that specific command, right, that one, to love your enemies, is really what sets Jesus and Christianity apart from pretty much everything else in the world. Is that right? Have you read that?
I don't know. I don't think so. But it does.
I mean, there are other things, but that's kind of seen as the one that, you look at it and nobody's saying that in the time of Jesus except him. Yeah. So it kind of sets him apart. And I understand why people would look at that and say, that ain't how the world works. Yeah. That doesn't work today. Well, that's a lie, right? Yeah. That what I just said, that's not how the world works. That actually may be true. But if that's true, it's because the world has ingrained that lie, correct? Yeah.
We can't, it's so foreign to us to think that our enemy should deserve mercy because we've been taught that if we show our enemies mercy, then it's just going to be turned back around on us, and then we will suffer the consequences.
Wasn't that true?
I think so, and I think I think that is true. But as a follower of Jesus, we have to look at the life that he lived, and that's exactly what happened to him. He loved his enemy and showed his enemy mercy, and they crucified him. And even on the cross, he's still forgiving them. So I know there are people that say that, well, that disagree with the love your enemies, turn the other cheek language, all that. Well, Jesus didn't really mean it like that. The only problem with that, I think, the problem with that line of logic is that you have these almost laws that Jesus gives on the best way to live with your enemy, and then you also have the actual lived out portion of his teachings, which is his journey to the cross. Not only did he say that you need to do this, but he actually did it.
Right.
And that kind of goes back to this. Well, how are you gonna convince somebody that living the way that Jesus said to live is the best way to live? You can tell them all day, but until you actually do it, I don't know if you're going to be convinced.
Yeah. And I think that's probably, well, I know that's what Paul's getting at whenever he uses the phrase imitate God. He's not really talking about it, well, at least in Ephesians 5, he's not just talking about all of God. He makes it very specific, and he says imitate God and walk in love as you see him. I forget the exact phrasing, but the idea is imitate the God that you see on the cross.
Yeah.
And that kind of God is a self-sacrificing God who is willfully taking up his cross for the betterment of the people around him. And it's easy to look at that and say, that's not how the world works. Mm-hmm. And there's truth in that, because that's not how the world works. But, the lie there is that that's not how the world should work, right? And so I think in every lie, there's a bit of truth. And it may be like 95% of the statement is true. Yeah. But it's the 5% that gets you. That's the deception. That's the lie.
That's the serpent with Eve.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, here's a lot of things that are true, but the lie is the one that, the little 5% is what gets you. Do you think we're good at detecting lies?
I don't. I don't think so. And I think the biblical authors knew that just in the way that they tell these stories. You, the lies, they come in these stories, and it's almost like we're oblivious to them. Whether it's the lies that you see with the serpent and Adam and Eve, or the lies that you see with Cain or Lamech, and just like that infection that we talked about earlier, that it spreads until you get to something as catastrophic as like the flood.
Okay.
And then even with like Abraham, the lies that he believed about trying to hold on to his family with bringing Lot, or to hold on to his wife by calling her his sister, and all the troubles that happen. I mean, every story that you go through in the Bible, you could see that our lie detector is very bad.
Yeah.
It's very bad.
And that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
If we are, I mean, just confronted with so many 95% true, but the 5% is what gets you lies, right? And we don't think critically about those things, and we ingest so much content every day. And we'll talk more about that in a little while. But if we're not really thinking about, is this true and real, or is this a lie and deception? What's dangerous about that is if we accept the lie and the deception and don't think about it, then we start, it's like you drove here today. We start operating based on, autopilot kind of, and we get angry all the time, and there's all these outbursts, and we don't even think about it. Or, we think about people in certain ways, and it's just how we are and how they are, and we don't think about and challenge those thoughts in our mind. And so that kind of leads to, Sturgill's got a line. In that same verse about society's depression, he talks about at the end of that verse, it just kind of goes and goes until the waters crash into uncharted shores so dark and bleak. That's what it becomes, right?
Yeah. I wrote down, this is the progression from Genesis 3 to Genesis 6.
Okay.
It's the
Did you really? So
yeah,
that's where you were? Okay.
That's what I wrote down by that line. We don't, the rivers start crying. I'm not sure what he's getting at with the rivers are all crying, but the ocean cannot speak. But I think he's talking about it starts out until you get to the point to where everything is, the waters are crashing and all the shores are uncharted, and now it's dark and bleak. Like as soon as I read that or heard that line, I thought of Genesis 6. This is what happens when we get into autopilot from the beginning, from Genesis 3, and our decision making isn't questioned.
Yeah.
We don't detect the lies, and then all of society is now in a state of chaos, depression, however you want to name it.
I've never seen an interview where Sturgill said this, but I get, he's from a coal country and is fully, I think, embraced that and writes a lot about it. And I kind of think what he's talking about here is something about the impact on the climate.
Yeah.
And I think, the pollution in the rivers and when the waters of the ocean crash into uncharted shores. I mean, that sounds to me like something as a result of the coal industry that he's so familiar with. But regardless, I know I almost regret even saying that, because I know that can become a very polarizing topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it has to extend beyond that, right? It's not just that. It's any lie that we believe and internalize, and it creates a disordered set of desires that leads to, impacts in society or even in our families, in our world, in our relationships that are dark and bleak. I mean, that's a common refrain in Scripture, right? I mean, that's kind of what we humans tend to do. What about this line a little bit later? This may be my favorite line in the whole song. When he says, "Don't call it a sign of the times when it's always been this way." That's true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the opening pages of the Bible in Genesis, and that's the story. And you see that same story with the two trees and the choice that's made repeat over and over again throughout Scripture, right?
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I mean, is that how you read it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. the test, the two trees of testing you see, like you said, on repeat. You can go for the Cain has a choice to make. Am I going to um, do good, or am I going to believe the lie and kill who I perceive as my enemy, which interestingly is his brother?
Mm-hmm.
You see it in David. He had a choice to make with Bathsheba. That was his tree of testing, and he decided to take what he thought in his eyes looked good and pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
And just like Sturgill says, that it's always been this way.
Yeah.
This is what humans do well, is taking what we want, when we want it, and how we want it. And typically it leads to some kind of suffering.
Yeah,
when we do that.
The serpent there is described in Genesis as crafty.
Yes.
What does that word mean?
Just,
It's kind of like deceitful, and it's
yes,
cunning. It's not like crafty in our world. Maybe, oh, he's very crafty, or she's very crafty. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
this is not a good thing. This is
he's able to
slick.
He's able to use his words and push the situation in the direction that he wants it to go.
Yeah, and so he comes and he says, "Did God really say not to eat of the fruit of any tree?" And then he says, "Well, God didn't mean what he said. Your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, and God didn't want you to be like God." And so the lie, the 5% lie under the 95% of maybe truth is you're better off making your own choices without God.
Yeah.
You're free to choose. You define what is good and what is evil for you. Sturgill's got this line at the end of that particular verse where he talks about the folks who plot their wicked schemes, setting fate for all mankind with evil that can fill God's pretty skies with clouds that burn and blind. So again, I think he's talking about coal here. But it's interesting to me that he uses the word evil. And I think that has to go back to this choice that happens in the garden when they get to define what is good and what is evil. God's already told them. But they seem to decide that they're going to seize that autonomy from God and decide that they are the ones who get to decide all their own choices. And so that means they get to redefine what is good and evil based on their own ideas and thoughts, which are formed by the lies. So they're deformed ideas and thoughts, shaped by the lies of the serpent, and it redefines for them what is good and evil. That still happens today, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of our life. That's our culture and our society. And that happens in a lot of ways, but I think maybe the most dangerous ways that happens is we start to redefine who and what God is and who or what we are. And we've talked a little bit about order and chaos, but we start to form our ideas of what a good life is or how we should live based on lies that we believe, right? You see that in life, don't you?
Yes. As you were saying that, it made me, there's an author that I've read that says everything that is true about Jesus is also true about you. And anything else is a lie that we have decided to believe. So all these deformed truths that we live out, they are lies, but it's not really who you are. You were created
right
in that image to be that light shining, that little pocket of heaven in the world. And anytime that you go against the grain of what you were created to do, that you just living out a lie that you chose to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And
can we get a little philosophical? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
okay.
I don't know
how.
I don't know how philosophical I can get, but we could try.
Have you read any Nietzsche?
No, I've heard people talk about him.
Okay,
but
I think you'll have some insight into this. I think where that gets us is if we redefine everything based on what we believe, based on and our beliefs are based on lies that we've internalized from the devil. Let's just start with that fundamental thought. Then we can get to the point where we redefine things so much that there really is no God. And if we still believe that there is a God, then he doesn't have any say or hold any sway over us, right? And I think that may have been what Nietzsche was getting at, but we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And so if I get the idea that there is no God, that God is, or even any semblance of a God, is a product of pre-modern times and a pre-scientific age, and we have learned better and more intellectual now, and belief in that God is dangerous. I hear some of the four horsemen of the new atheism talk about any belief in God is dangerous because look at what it promotes in the world: evil, pain, and suffering, and killing and murder. Leads to wars and fights and no peace. Okay, well then it becomes enticing for a secular age then to live like there is no God, or to assume that there is no God. And I think this is right, and I'm absolutely okay if I'm fact checked at some point and I'm wrong about this, but I think our age, or this age, is the first to attempt to live like there is no God. You know, every age up until this late modern or postmodern time that we're living in has just kind of assumed that behind everything there's a divine being, a higher power. We're kind of the first ones to live like there's not, and it's been a disaster. Like I think there's a huge decline in the new atheism now because people have followed that line of thought and they recognize that this makes things way worse than we ever thought they would be. It's been a train wreck, a disaster. And so we start to redefine things and we get to the point where we're okay with there is no God. And that influences what we think about us, right? Because if there is no God, then there's no creator and there's no design. If there's no design, then there's no intent behind making people like us. And if there's no intent or purpose for us, well, then there's really no morality, which gets to the question of how can somebody like Sturgill define good and evil without some standard of morality? And so even that small phrase presupposes that there is a God behind this. So if there is morality, or if there's no morality, then there's no accountability. And if there's no accountability, then we can do whatever in the world we want, which sounds good for us until everybody else gets that freedom too. And if they can do whatever in the world they want, then that impacts us a lot. And so we start to redefine the question of how do we live and what's the good life? Is it that I can do what I want and live as I please and I have no accountability and freedom to live whatever my little heart desires? That's only possible with no creator, no God, no standard of behavior, no morality, and it leads to utter chaos and anarchy, which is the opposite of what God ordered in the beginning, right? And I think that's what Nietzsche was getting at when he said, we mourn the death of God. We've killed God. Right?
Yeah.
And it leads to complete chaos. There's no meaning in life. There's no concern about how I live. And so it leads, that lie, just that one little lie, followed out, leads to Sturgill's lines: society's depression, darkness, obliqueness, evil that fills God's pretty skies with clouds that burn and blind. I talked a lot. Respond to that.
I do think that there are, and who was it that said, "I like your Jesus, but I just don't like your Christians"?
That was Gandhi.
Gandhi. Okay, so
I think he was painting with too broad of a brush there.
well, yeah. But I do think that there are some, call it interpretations or ways of seeing God that needed to die.
Mm-hmm.
And even I think in Jesus's ministry, he was actually doing that. When he's up against the religious leaders, they had painted a vision of who God is and what God wants in the world, that clearly did not line up with the way Jesus was depicting God. And I think we fall into the same boat as the religious leaders sometimes, as painting God in an opposite light of what Jesus is trying to show us. So I think that there are ways of seeing God that do need to die. Now, sometimes I think we throw throw it all away. I think I have personally talked to people that are not, they call themselves, I can't remember what category, the nuns, or they're not religiously affiliated with anything. And I think it's because they've seen a version of Christianity that is not helpful.
Yeah.
And it may be a deception in itself.
Well,
And
a Christian who's always fighting with somebody has nothing to say to someone who's looking for peace, right?
Yeah.
If somebody's looking for an answer to the problems in life, and they have just, like, life is always a battlefield for them, it's war all the time, and they're always in some kind of drama, and their image of Christianity is these folks fight about everything.
Yeah.
What good does that do?
Yeah.
And so I like the phrase, or I like the idea that I just don't know many people who reject what they see in Jesus. There may be some.
That's it.
I talked about this yesterday. I don't know many people who would reject what they see in Jesus. I do know people who reject what they see in church.
Mm-hmm.
There shouldn't be a difference, right? I mean, is it okay to say that? There really should not be a difference in what we Christians live and how we see Jesus live. We should, if we're Christ-like and we're supposed to imitate Jesus, then we should, don't get me wrong, imitate Jesus, right?
Doesn't he say in is it John 8 where he's, maybe it's not 8, where he says, I'm sending them out into the world, basically, that like they're me in the world now. In his long prayer, I can't remember which chapter it is. I know it's in John.
That would be later.
Yeah, maybe it's John 10. But so this idea that we're supposed to be extensions of Christ in the world sounds great. And I do think that Christians have, and all the expressions of Christianity do start with good intentions, but I think we, somewhere along the way, we get caught up in maybe some lies, maybe some voices that are telling us that, well, these are the important things to worry about.
Yeah.
This is what really distinguishes between a true believer and the secular world.
Yeah, and maybe there's truth in some of that.
There is, yes.
Like, I would not say that if I'm on the same page with you, I wouldn't say that those things are not important.
Yes, yeah.
95% of that may be true. The 5% that gets you is, well, because I checked all these boxes and got all these things right, I don't have to worry about
Absolutely
the weightier matters of the law, as Jesus said, the justice and righteousness.
Yeah. If your version of Christianity sole purpose is I need to do the correct things to go to the good place when I die, then when you run into teachings of Jesus, like love your neighbor as yourself or love your enemy, turn the other cheek, well, that doesn't matter. I don't really have to do that. I did this. I did the important thing, so I can put this under the rug because it's not going to change anything for me because I've already got the ticket at the end. So it doesn't really matter at this point. And I think that's what we've done.
I hope that's a minority view.
I hope, but I'm not convinced that it is sometimes.
Maybe we just do our part to keep making it a minority view.
Yeah.
That'd be a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm interested. We're going maybe a little long. That's okay. That's a good discussion.
Probably going to have to edit a lot of this.
I'm actually kind of committed to no edits. I feel like this is just my opinion. I think Sturgill is pretty raw in what he writes.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that he doesn't edit. I'm saying that he definitely does things his own way and doesn't really care about being very polished.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's only right for me to not polish this up a lot. And it also takes quite a bit of time. And, recording content and editing a podcast is not my day job. Yeah. So I'm kind of committed to just let it fly and see what happens with it, So I'm not going to edit a whole lot out of this. I am interested in this line. How I wish, this is from the chorus, how I wish somebody would make these voices go away. Is that possible? Do we ever see a point where there are no lies? Do the voices go away?
I don't think so. In this age now, I think that there is an age that will come. I hope that there is an age that will come where every decision. We have a good friend that says, "Well, what heaven is where everybody makes the decisions in their life based off of the fruits of the Spirit. That's all that will be done is love, joy, peace, patience,
Well,
all of that."
in Dallas Willard's words, the kingdom of God is where God's will reigns.
Yes.
And what
Yeah.
God wants done is what gets done.
Yes. And
We haven't fully realized that yet.
we haven't.
Yeah.
And as a Christian, I hope for that day and that age. Now, before we get to that, I don't think these voices will go away.
So what do we do? Because the voices are out there.
Yes.
And if there's always going to be something or someone that promotes a lie, maybe 95% true, but the 5% gets you. What do we do? Give me a takeaway.
I think we need to, just like the bracelet, the WWJD, which that's a little simplistic, but every decision that we make, if we filter it, especially the decisions that we have on autopilot, we filter it through Jesus, through what I believe is the truest thing, the truest way of living in the world as a human. And but there's one practice that, because a lot of times we lie to ourselves and think, well, we're fine. Like I'm doing pretty good. There's not much that I need to worry about. I don't really have anything I need to work on. And there's a practice that I hate doing, just because it sucks. And if you'll sit on that by yourself at the edge of your bed or wherever by yourself and just ask, is there something that I need to change? You will get an answer. You might have to sit there a little bit.
What if I don't want the answer?
That's the sucky part. You will get an answer every single time. And part of society's depression here, that I think Sturgill hits on, is we're so busy in life that we never stop to have a moment like that to actually self-reflect on, okay, maybe there's some lies that I'm living, but I haven't given myself enough time to think about them. And when we do little practices like that, filter it through Jesus, ask ourselves the hard questions. Where do I need to eliminate this lie and then put a little bit of truth in its place through Jesus?
I have a couple of follow-ups on that.
Okay.
I would almost label that as what we do in prayer.
Yes.
Would you say that?
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
that would be
sitting with Jesus.
Yeah, one of prayer I don't think is it's not just a private, therapeutic kind of thing. It's this is Henry Nouwen's words, but it's a furnace of transformation.
That's good.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's a purging, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, furnace has a fire, right? And fires burn. So I think it's a reflective, contemplative time whenever we think about, what do I need to change? I do also think that it changes things. I think, prayer works. And so we not only change things, but we also can change ourselves. Sometimes we come down with like a false dichotomy on that. We don't have to. It can be both. It can change things and it can change us. But you have to slow down and you have to have some kind of silence and solitude in order to do that. And that's tough. And we're very busy people and we want to hurry, and silence and solitude are hard to come by in our days. Maybe we need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry.
Yeah.
John Mark Comer book. It's a great book. So there's that. And then you also brought up the WWJD bracelet a couple of times. And my question would be, how do you know what J would D if you don't read about Jesus?
Yeah.
Right? How do we know what he would do? Again, Dallas Willard. How do we know how he would behave in my life if he were living my life if I don't ever read about him? And so there has to be a mix, I think, of scripture and prayer in order to really, really combat the lies. In fact, You know who Evagrius the monk is? You ever heard of him?
Have not.
You've heard of the 7 deadly sins?
Yes.
Okay. They kind of originated with him through, kind of molded and shaped by other writers later than him. But he wrote in like the 400s. And he wrote a book called A Monastic Handbook for Combating Demons, which is a pretty awesome title. And there's like 480 entries in that handbook and every one of them, I think, begins with against the thought of this. And so it's all about changing how you think. And there's all kinds of writing in there and good ideas, but it's all about prayer and scripture. It's ingesting truth to combat the lies of Satan, and it's about spending time reflecting on what needs to change in our lives. So those are two. I think one that we miss, if we're really going to be able to drown out the voices, we have to have better voices, and that is a call, I think, for Christian community. Mm-hmm. It's a call for people to spend time regularly talking about some of these topics with other people. Iron sharpens iron. And so don't you think there's a call here for a Christian community to kind of hash these things out together and try to find a better way and drown out the lying voices?
I know for me, personally, when things get tough, I have a bad habit of isolating, but isolating in a negative sense. Because we talk about, the solitude for positive growth. But sometimes, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but a lot of times things get tough. We're dealing with difficult situations, and we kind of shut down and push away the other irons that are going to sharpen us. Because there's a desire in us that I just don't want to fix this. I'm happy with the life that I've got right now, the decisions that I'm making, even though that's a lie that I'm telling myself. But I keep pushing these people away that are actually going to tell me, hey, that this isn't good. That there's a better way to live in the world. But sometimes that's the sucky part. That when we started this conversation, we talked about how the good decisions, usually you suffer a little bit before you see any positive outcome. The bad decisions, I think, will lead to suffering, but in the moment they feel good.
Yeah.
And in the moment of needing community, a lot of times it's like, I'm gonna push them away. I don't want to listen to the good voices. Yeah. Right now.
It's painful.
Yeah.
Right. In the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis talks about when the scales come off, it hurts. It's painful, right?
Yeah.
Clawed off.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need a little help clawing those scales off. So we ought to probably round this out. We've been going a long time. I think it's pretty clear that there are all kinds of voices out in the world, and we are a society, and I don't know if this is personally true for you and me and for everybody that listens to this, but we have virtually unlimited access to voices that will tell us either truth or lies or some mixture of both. This is kind of mind-blowing to me. The average American adult watches TV or videos online for 6 hours a day. That's a lot. The average millennial is on their phone about 4 hours a day. And we're not just like, we're ingesting content, right? About 2,800 hours a year consuming digital content. That's about a decade of your life over the long haul. And in response to that, that's 2,800 hours a year. We only spend about 153 hours a year consuming Jesus content if all we get is when we go to church. And we're there every time the doors are open. And so there's no wonder that we're more depressed and anxious and worried. And, in Sturgill's mind, where things are dark and bleak, I'm not surprised by that. And so I think the remedy to that is to recognize that there are lies in the world that we consume all the time, and to combat those things with a very habitual approach to prayer, scripture, and Christian community. I don't expect that those things are going to change us immediately. I'm a fan of Dallas Willard's phrase about a slow renovation of the heart.
Yeah.
It takes time and it takes effort, and sometimes it's going to be painful. But if we're going to acknowledge that the voices are not going to go away, I wish they would. Sturgill's line, I wish the voices would go away. They're not. And so since they're always going to be present, they have always, don't call it a sign of the times. It's always been this way. It's always going to be that way. Then I think a daily, habitual approach to prayer, scripture, and Christian relationships and Christian community. I don't know that there's any way to overcome those voices and the lies with those voices than those three things. What you think?
I would agree.
Okay. Well, if you agree, then we'll close this thing down and we'll go grab some lunch.
All right.
Is that a good deal?
Sounds good.
Man, thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I learned a lot, and it kept my attention. And, man, I just appreciate you being here.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Three Chords in the Truth is about exploring the intersection of God and good music, uncovering what's real, what's good, what's beautiful in the music, and thinking about how it points us to what is true, what's really true.